Jake Morrison pressed his face against the transport window and watched the massive space station grow larger with each passing second. Nexus Station stretched across the horizon like a metallic city, its towers and domes gleaming under the light of 3 distant suns. Jake had seen pictures of the station before, but nothing had prepared him for its actual size. The thing was bigger than most moons he had visited. The transport pilot, a blue-skinned Altarian with 4 arms, glanced back at Jake through the cockpit door. "First time seeing the Nexus, human?" the pilot asked in heavily accented standard. "Galactic," Jake nodded, still staring out the window. "It always impresses the newcomers," the pilot continued. "Been operating for over 2,000 years. Houses the greatest minds in the galaxy." Jake felt his stomach twist with nervousness. Greatest minds in the galaxy, what was he doing here? He was just a dirt digger from Earth, someone who spent his days brushing sand off old pottery and trying to figure out how ancient humans had lived. The invitation to observe the Grand Assembly had come as a complete shock. Most humans had never even heard of the Grand Assembly, let alone been invited to attend one. The docking procedure took another hour. Jake watched through the window as dozens of other ships attached to the station's massive docking bays. He saw vessels from across the known galaxy, sleek Vorthan cruisers that looked like silver arrows, bulky collective ships that resembled floating cities, and the organic-looking Etherean transports that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. When Jake finally stepped off his transport, he immediately felt out of place. The docking bay buzzed with activity as beings from dozens of different species moved about their business. Most of them towered over Jake's modest human height. The Draconians looked like walking dragons, their scales reflecting the artificial light. The Altarians moved with fluid grace, their multiple arms handling several tasks at once. The Vorthans stood perfectly still, their metallic bodies humming with internal computations. Jake clutched his small travel bag and followed the signs toward the visitor registration area. His simple brown clothing looked shabby compared to the elaborate robes, biosuits, and energy fields that other species wore. A few aliens glanced at him with what he interpreted as mild curiosity, the way someone might look at an unusual pet. At the registration desk, a holographic assistant materialized in front of Jake. The assistant appeared as a shimmering humanoid figure that shifted between different species, appearances every few seconds. "Welcome to Nexus Station," it said in perfect English. "Please state your name and purpose." "Jake Morrison from Earth," he replied, feeling foolish. "I'm here to observe the Grand Assembly." The hologram flickered for a moment as if checking some internal database. "Ah, yes, Dr. Morrison, you are our human observer. How fascinating. Please proceed to Level 7, Section 12. Your quarters have been prepared." Jake took the transport tube to his assigned level, watching through the transparent walls as the station's interior revealed itself. Gardens floated in zero gravity, tended by beings he did not recognize. Laboratories filled with equipment beyond. His understanding stretched along corridors that seemed to go on forever. Libraries contained books, crystals, and data storage devices from hundreds of different worlds. His quarters turned out to be a small but comfortable room with a bed, desk, and viewing port. A welcome packet waited on the desk, written in dozens of languages including English. Jake opened it and began to read about the Grand Assembly. Every 100 years, the galaxy's most brilliant scholars gathered at Nexus Station to tackle the greatest unsolved mysteries of their time. Past assemblies had solved the riddle of dark matter manipulation, discovered the secrets of faster-than-light communication, and unlocked the mysteries of quantum consciousness. The current assembly would focus on a single question that had puzzled galactic civilization for over 3,000 years. The mystery concerned a species known simply as the Ancients. Long before most current galactic civilizations had achieved spaceflight, the Ancients had built an empire spanning dozens of star systems. Their technology had been so advanced that even today, 3 millennia later, much of it remained beyond the understanding of modern science. Their cities had been marvels of engineering, with buildings that touched the clouds and transportation systems that moved people at incredible speeds. But then, suddenly and without explanation, the Ancients had vanished. Not destroyed, not conquered, not evolved beyond recognition, simply gone. Their cities remained intact, their technology still functioned, their libraries and databases were perfectly preserved. But not a single ancient could be found anywhere in the galaxy. Jake read through the summary of previous investigations with growing amazement. The greatest minds of dozens of species had spent centuries trying to solve this mystery. They had examined every piece of ancient technology, analyzed every scrap of their writing, and explored every world they had ever inhabited. Theories had been proposed, tested, and discarded. Wars, plagues, transcendence to higher dimensions, time travel, mass suicide, voluntary exile to distant galaxies, every possibility had been considered and found lacking. Tomorrow, Jake would sit in on the discussions as the current generation of galactic scholars presented their latest findings and theories. He felt intimidated by the prospect. What could he possibly contribute to a mystery that had stumped beings far more intelligent than himself? He activated his room's communication system and sent a message back to Earth, letting his colleagues at the university know he had arrived safely. Then he lay down on the bed and stared out the viewing port at the stars. Somewhere out there among those countless points of light, an entire species had simply disappeared without a trace. The mystery was so complete, so perfect in its lack of clues that it seemed almost impossible. Jake's last thought before falling asleep was a simple one that would prove more important than he could possibly imagine. If the ancients had wanted to disappear completely, where would they have gone? Not where could they have gone or how might they have left, but where would they have wanted to go? It seemed like such a basic question that Jake assumed someone must have asked it before. He would learn the next day that sometimes the most basic questions are the ones that brilliant minds forget to ask. Jake woke early the next morning and made his way to the Grand Assembly Hall. The massive chamber could hold 10,000 beings, and from what Jake could see, it was nearly full. Tier after tier of seats rose toward the ceiling, each section designed to accommodate different species. The Etherians floated in special energy fields. The collective occupied linked pod networks that allowed their hive minds to function properly. And the massive Draconians had reinforced platforms to support their weight. Jake found his assigned seat in the observer section, a small area reserved for guests and junior researchers. He pulled out his simple tablet computer and activated its recording function, feeling very much like a student about to attend his first university lecture. Around him, other beings manipulated holographic displays, quantum computation spheres, and devices he could not even begin to identify. The assembly began when a tall, crystalline being stepped onto the central platform. This was Dr. Zephyr Kolthara, the Altarian scholar leading the investigation into the ancient mystery. Her body appeared to be made of living diamond, and when she spoke, her voice resonated through the chamber like music. "Honored colleagues," Dr. Kolthara began, "we gather once again to confront the greatest puzzle in galactic history. For 3,047 years, the disappearance of the ancients has challenged our understanding of what is possible. Today we will examine the evidence once more and explore new theories that may finally provide answers." Jake watched as a three-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared above the platform. Dozens of star systems glowed with red markers indicating worlds where the ancients had once lived. The scope of their former empire was staggering. They had controlled more territory than the current top 5 galactic civilizations combined. Professor Grim Ironscale took the platform next. The massive Draconian moved slowly but deliberately, his bronze scales catching the light as he spoke. "Let us review what we know with certainty," he rumbled, his voice deep enough to make Jake's chest vibrate. The ancients ruled for approximately 50,000 years. They achieved technological advancement that we still cannot match. They built cities on over 400 worlds and maintained a peaceful, stable civilization throughout their reign. The holographic display changed to show images of ancient cities. Jake stared in amazement at buildings that seemed to defy gravity, floating high above the ground while connected by bridges of solid light. Gardens grew in impossible spirals around. towers that disappeared into the clouds. Transportation systems moved people through tubes of pure energy. Then, approximately 3,000 years ago, something changed, Professor Ironscale continued. Within a period of less than 50 years, every ancient settlement was abandoned. No bodies were found, no signs of struggle or violence, no indication of disease or disaster. They simply left everything behind and vanished. A Vorthan representative stepped forward, its metallic body gleaming under the chamber lights. Jake had learned that Vorthans were living computers, beings who had merged so completely with technology that they thought in pure mathematics. We have calculated 847 different scenarios that could explain the disappearance. The Vorthan announced in a voice that sounded like electronic music. Each has been tested against available evidence. All have been found insufficient. Dr. Kolthara activated another display, this one showing a timeline of theories that had been proposed over the centuries. The war theory was our first major investigation, she explained. We hypothesized that the ancients were destroyed by an unknown enemy. Teams spent centuries searching for weapon signatures, battle damage, or evidence of invasion. Nothing was found. Their worlds showed no signs of conflict whatsoever. Jake took notes on his tablet as the presentation continued. The thoroughness of previous investigations was impressive and intimidating. Every theory he might have considered had apparently been explored in exhaustive detail. The plague theory suggested a species-specific disease, Dr. Kolthara continued. We analyzed ancient genetic material from thousands of sources. We simulated every known pathogen and invented theoretical ones. No disease could account for such complete disappearance without leaving biological evidence. Professor Ironscale took over again. The transcendence theory proposed that the ancients evolved beyond physical existence. We searched for energy, signatures, consciousness echoes, and dimensional phase shifts. We found nothing to suggest they achieved any form of non-corporeal existence. An Etherian representative floated forward, its translucent form shimmering with internal light. Etherians communicated through telepathy and rarely spoke aloud, but this one made the effort for the assembly. We attempted direct mental contact with ancient artifacts, it said in a voice like wind chimes. Their technology retains no consciousness imprints. Their buildings hold no psychic echoes. If they transcended, they left no trace for minds like. Hours to follow, the presentation continued for hours. Jake listened to theory after theory, each one more sophisticated than the last, each one thoroughly debunked by evidence or lack thereof. The resource depletion theory failed because ancient worlds still contained abundant resources. The time travel theory failed because temporal sensors detected no chronological anomalies. The dimensional shift theory failed because dimensional barriers remained intact. A member of the collective spoke next, its voice coming from multiple sources simultaneously as the hive mind coordinated its response. We have interfaced directly with ancient computer networks. Their databases remain functional. Their last recorded entries show normal daily activities. Supply deliveries, maintenance schedules, social gatherings, then abruptly all entries cease. No explanation. No farewell messages. No indication of impending departure. Jake raised his hand tentatively, then immediately felt foolish. This was an observer section. He was not supposed to participate. But Dr. Kolthara noticed his gesture and, perhaps out of curiosity about the lone human present, acknowledged him. Yes, Dr. Morrison? You have a question? Jake stood up, feeling every eye in the massive chamber focus on him. I was wondering, he said, his voice sounding very small in the vast space. Has anyone ever asked where the ancients came from originally? I mean, before they built their empire, where did they start out? Several beings in the audience made sounds that Jake interpreted as amusement. Dr. Kolthara's crystalline features shifted in what might have been a smile. Dr. Morrison, that information is considered irrelevant to the current investigation. The ancients evolved across multiple star systems over millions of years. They had no single point of origin that could be considered a home in any meaningful sense. Jake sat down, feeling embarrassed. Of course, they would have considered such basic questions. These beings had been working on this mystery longer than human civilization had existed. Still, something about the dismissal bothered him. Though he could not quite put his finger on what it was, the presentation continued, but Jake found his attention wandering. He kept thinking about that simple question: where had they come from? And more importantly, why did everyone seem so certain it did not matter? The assembly took a break for midday feeding time, and Jake found himself in the station's main cafeteria surrounded by the strangest collection of beings he had ever seen. The Draconians ate what looked like molten metal from specially heated bowls. The Etherians absorbed energy directly from light sources. The collective members shared a single large container of blue liquid that they took turns accessing through connecting tubes. Jake ordered something that resembled Earth food from an automated dispenser and sat at a small table by himself. He pulled out his tablet and began reviewing his notes from the morning session. Something was bothering him about the whole presentation, but he could not figure out what it was. A shadow fell across his table. Jake looked up to see Dr. Kolthara standing beside him, her crystalline form refracting the cafeteria lights into small rainbows. "Dr. Morrison," she said, her musical voice carrying a tone of polite curiosity. "I hope you are finding the assembly educational." "Very much so," Jake replied, gesturing for her to sit. "The scope of the investigation is incredible. I had no idea how much work had been done on this mystery." Dr. Kolthara settled into the chair across from him with a sound like wind chimes. 3,000 years of research tends to accumulate, she said, with what Jake thought might be humor. Every major civilization has contributed scholars to this problem at some point. We have applied every analytical method known to Galactic science. Jake nodded, then decided to risk another question. "Can I ask you something about the cultural artifacts you mentioned earlier? You said the ancients left behind libraries and databases. What kinds of things did they write about near the end?" "The usual topics," Dr. Kolthara replied dismissively. "Scientific papers, historical records, administrative documents. Nothing that provides clues about their disappearance." "But what about their art? Their stories? Their personal writings?" Dr. Kolthara's crystalline features shifted slightly. "Dr. Morrison, we are investigating a scientific mystery, not conducting a study of ancient literature. Their artistic output has no bearing on the question of where they went." Jake felt that familiar prickle of curiosity that had driven him to become an archaeologist in the first place. On Earth, we find that art and personal writings often reveal more about a civilization's mindset than their official records. Sometimes people write in their diaries what they would never put in a government document. "Humans and ancients are completely different species," Dr. Kolthara said, her tone becoming slightly impatient. "You cannot apply human psychological patterns to beings who evolved under entirely different circumstances. The ancients were a purely logical race. Their decision-making was based on rational analysis, not emotional impulses." After Dr. Kolthara left, Jake remained at his table thinking about their conversation. He understood her point about not applying human psychology to alien species, but something still felt wrong about dismissing all the personal material so completely. In his experience, no species was purely logical. Even the most rational beings had feelings, desires, and dreams. When the assembly reconvened, Jake paid careful attention as various scholars presented their latest research. A Vorthan team had analyzed every piece of ancient technology using quantum archaeological methods. An Etherian group had attempted to commune with the psychic residues left in ancient buildings. A collective unit had processed every piece of ancient writing through their hive mind computational networks. All of their work was impressive, sophisticated, and thorough. All of it focused on the technical aspects of the disappearance, how it might have been accomplished, what methods could have been used, what evidence should exist if various theories were correct. But Jake noticed that nobody was talking about why the ancients might have wanted to disappear. Everyone seemed to assume that the disappearance was either involuntary or the result of some external force. The possibility that the ancients had simply chosen to leave was mentioned only in passing, and always dismissed because there was no logical reason for such a decision. During another break, Jake approached one of the data terminals in the assembly hall. He requested access to the ancient cultural database, expecting to be denied. To his surprise, the system granted him basic viewing privileges. Apparently because he was a registered observer at the assembly. Jake began browsing through ancient writings, starting with the most recent entries before their disappearance. The official documents were indeed mundane: supply inventories, maintenance schedules, administrative memos. But Jake dug deeper, looking for personal journals, private letters, artistic works. What he found surprised him. In the final decades, before their disappearance, ancient art had undergone a subtle but noticeable shift. Their earlier works had focused on cosmic themes: the grandeur of space, the beauty of distant stars, the excitement of exploration and discovery. But their later pieces increasingly focused on smaller, more intimate subjects. Jake found paintings of simple dwellings rather than grand cities, sculptures that emphasized natural forms rather than technological achievements, poetry that spoke of quiet places and peaceful rest rather than adventure and conquest. Most interesting of all, he found repeated references to concepts that the translation software struggled to render in standard Galactic. The closest translations were words like root place, first home, and originalski. Jake stared at these terms on his tablet screen, feeling that familiar tingle of recognition. These were not random words. They were themes. They appeared over and over again in ancient writings from the final century before the disappearance. Jake looked up from his tablet to see Professor Ironscale approaching. The massive draconian had apparently noticed Jake's intense focus on the terminal. "Finding anything interesting in our archives, human?" Ironscale asked, his deep voice carrying a note of skeptical amusement. "Maybe," Jake replied carefully. "I was looking at some of the personal writings from right before they vanished. There seems to be a pattern in their art and literature that I do not think has been fully explored." Ironscale snorted, a sound like steam escaping from a pressure valve. "Dr. Morrison, we have analyzed every aspect of ancient culture with tools far more sophisticated than your simple human pattern recognition. If there were clues in their artistic output, we would have found them centuries ago." "But have you looked at the emotional content?" Jake persisted. "The themes they were exploring? The feelings they were expressing?" "Feelings," Professor Ironscale repeated, as if the word tasted bad. "Dr. Morrison, the ancients were the most advanced civilization in galactic history. They did not make major decisions based on feelings. They were logical, rational beings who calculated the optimal course of action and followed it." Jake nodded politely but remained unconvinced. In his experience studying human civilizations, the most rational people still had hearts. They still felt homesick, lonely, or nostalgic. They still dreamed of returning to simpler times or familiar places. As the assembly session continued, Jake found himself focusing less on the sophisticated theories being presented, and more on a simple question that everyone else seemed to consider irrelevant. What if the ancients had simply wanted to go home? Jake spent the evening in his quarters, unable to sleep despite the long day at the assembly. His tablet lay open on the desk, displaying dozens of ancient texts he had downloaded from the cultural database. The more he read, the more convinced he became that everyone was missing something important. The patterns were subtle but undeniable. Ancient poetry from their final century contained repeated references to the first dawn and where light began. Their architecture had gradually shifted from the towering spires of their golden age to smaller, more organic structures that seemed to mimic natural formations. Even their scientific papers from the final decades showed increasing interest in stellar archaeology and the study of dead star systems. Jake sat up in bed suddenly as a thought struck him. He grabbed his tablet and began searching through the ancient database with new purpose. If his theory was correct, there should be evidence of the ancients researching their own origins in those final years. Not just casual interest, but intensive, systematic investigation. What he found made his heart race. In the last 50 years before their disappearance, The ancients had launched dozens of deep space archaeological expeditions. They had sent teams to explore regions of space that their own maps marked as empty void. Most telling of all, they had begun developing technologies that had nothing to do with their normal scientific interests: dimensional engineering, reality manipulation, and something the translation software could only render as space-time restoration. Jake rolled out of bed and began pacing his small quarters. The pieces were starting to fit together, but he needed more information. He needed to know where these archaeological expeditions had gone and what they had found there. He spent the next several hours digging through expedition records, technical specifications, and resource allocation documents. The picture that emerged was startling. The ancients had been conducting a massive, coordinated search for something in regions of space that contemporary galactic maps showed as completely empty, but Jake had an advantage that the alien scholars apparently lacked. He was used to thinking about time on geological scales. As an archaeologist, he understood that star systems could die, that entire regions of space could become barren over millions of years, and that the locations of ancient civilizations might bear no resemblance to current galactic geography. Jake activated his tablet's Stellar Evolution program, a basic tool that any archaeology student would recognize. He began entering the coordinates where the ancient expeditions had been sent, then ran backward simulations to see what those regions of space had looked like millions of years ago. The results took his breath away. Every single expedition had been sent to locations where star systems had once existed but had since been destroyed by supernovas, stellar collapse, or other cosmic disasters. The ancients had not been exploring empty space at all. They had been searching the graves of dead worlds. Jake cross-referenced the expedition dates with the cultural timeline he had been building. The pattern was perfect. As ancient art became more focused on themes of home and return, their scientists were working frantically to locate and study the remnants of ancient star systems. As their poetry spoke of first light and original sky, their engineers were developing technologies that could manipulate reality itself. By morning, Jake had assembled enough evidence to support a theory that seemed impossible but fit all the available facts. The ancients had not disappeared due to any external force or involuntary circumstance. They had spent decades planning and preparing for the most ambitious project in galactic history, going home to a world that no longer existed. When the assembly reconvened, Jake sat in the observer section, clutching his tablet, his hands shaking with excitement and nervousness. The morning session featured presentations from the galaxy's most advanced computational minds, beings who could process information at speeds that made human thought seem glacial by comparison. A team of Vorthan superintelligences presented their latest analysis of ancient technology, demonstrating how they had reverse-engineered devices that even the ancients' own manuals could not fully explain. An Etherean collective consciousness shared their attempts to telepathically commune with ancient artifacts, using mental abilities that humans could barely imagine. Each presentation was more sophisticated than the last, and each one failed to provide any new insights into the fundamental question of where the ancients had gone. Jake watched as the galaxy's greatest minds continued to focus on the how and the what, while completely ignoring the why. During the midday break, Jake made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. He approached Dr. Kolthara and Professor Ironscale, who were discussing quantum probability matrices with several other senior scholars. "Excuse me," Jake said, his voice barely steady. "I think I know where the ancients went." The conversation stopped. Dr. Kolthara turned her crystalline features toward Jake with an expression that might have been polite interest or barely contained annoyance. "Dr. Morrison, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, this mystery has challenged the greatest minds in the galaxy for 3 millennia. Perhaps you should—" "They went home," Jake interrupted, knowing he might never get another chance to speak. "To their original homeworld. The one that was destroyed millions of years ago." Professor Ironscale made a sound that was definitely amusement this time. "Dr. Morrison, that is impossible. You cannot return to a world that no longer exists." The Ancients were many things, but they were not capable of reversing stellar evolution. Jake took a deep breath and activated his tablet. No, but they were capable of dimensional engineering, and they spent their final decades developing reality manipulation technologies. What if they did not try to bring back their homeworld? What if they created a new one exactly like it used to be? The group of scholars fell silent. Jake continued quickly before anyone could interrupt him again. Look at their expedition records from the final 50 years. They were systematically exploring dead star systems, searching for something specific. Their art and literature became obsessed with themes of return and origin. Their technology development focused on dimensional manipulation and space-time. Restoration. They were not trying to escape to somewhere else. They were trying to recreate somewhere that had been lost. Dr. Kolthara crystalline form seemed to shimmer with increased intensity. Dr. Morrison, even if such a thing were theoretically possible, how would we verify it? How would we find a pocket dimension containing a reconstructed world? Jake felt his heart pounding as he realized he was about to either make the greatest discovery in galactic history or embarrass himself beyond recovery. We start with the coordinates, he said, pulling up his stellar evolution data. I found references in their oldest artifacts to something they called the first light. I ran stellar evolution models on the coordinates, and I know where their original star system used to be before it went supernova 4.5 million years ago. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Finally, Professor Ironscale spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Show us. Jake's hands trembled as he projected his data onto the portable display unit that Dr. Kolthara had provided. The holographic star map appeared in the air between them, showing a region of space that current galactic charts marked as empty void. But Jake's stellar evolution model revealed what had once been there, a beautiful blue star with 7 planets. The third one perfect for supporting life? This is where it all began, Jake said, his voice growing more confident as he explained his findings. 4.5 million years ago, the ancients evolved on a world they called Ethros, orbiting a star they named First Light, but their sun was unstable. It went supernova while they were still developing space travel, destroying everything they had ever known. Professor Ironscale leaned forward, his massive form casting a shadow over the holographic display. You are suggesting that a species spent millions of years remembering a world none of them had ever seen. Not remembering, Jake replied, mourning. Look at their cultural development over time. Every few thousand years they would have periods, where their art focused on themes of loss and searching. They never forgot what they had lost, even after millennia of building new civilizations on other worlds. Dr. Kolthara's crystalline features shifted through several colors as she processed this information. Even if this psychological analysis has merit, Dr. Morrison, it does not explain how they could return to a world that was vaporized millions of years ago. Jake switched to another display showing ancient technological development in their final centuries. They figured out how to build it again. Not just any world, but an exact replica of their original home. Look at their dimensional engineering research. Look at their reality manipulation experiments. They were not trying to escape to another dimension. They were trying to create one. The small group of scholars had grown larger as word spread through the assembly hall. Jake found himself surrounded by some of the most brilliant minds in the galaxy, all of them staring at his simple human data displays with expressions ranging from skepticism to amazement. A Vorthan computational unit stepped forward, its metallic form humming with increased processing activity. The energy requirements for such a project would be astronomical, it announced in its electronic voice. Creating an entire star system within a pocket dimension would require power sources beyond even ancient capabilities. Unless they used their entire civilization as a power source, Jake replied, surprised by his own boldness. What if every ancient willingly contributed their life energy to the project? What if the disappearance was not evacuation but transformation? They did not leave to go to their new homeworld. They became their new homeworld. The silence that followed was profound. Jake could hear the hum of the station's life, support systems, and the distant murmur of conversations in other parts of the hall. Finally, Dr. Kolthara spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "How do we test this theory?" Jake pulled up the coordinates he had calculated. "We scan this region of space with your most advanced dimensional detection equipment. If I'm right, there should be traces of an artificial pocket dimension anchored to these exact coordinates." What happened next surprised Jake more than anything else in his life. Dr. Kolthara and Professor Ironscale exchanged glances, then simultaneously activated their personal communication devices. Within minutes, they had requisition time on the station's most powerful scanning array, a device normally reserved for mapping dark matter and detecting gravitational anomalies. The entire assembly moved to the station's primary sensor bay, a massive chamber filled with equipment that hurt Jake's eyes to look at directly. Technicians from a dozen species worked together to calibrate the scanning array, their movements coordinated with a precision that spoke of centuries of practice. Jake stood to one side, feeling very much like a spectator at his own discovery. The coordinates were entered into the system, and the most sophisticated sensors in known space began probing a region of apparently empty void millions of light years away. The first scan showed nothing. The second scan showed nothing. Jake began to feel sick to his stomach as he imagined the embarrassment of being wrong in front of so many distinguished scholars. Then on the third scan, something appeared on the displays that made everyone in the chamber fall silent. There, exactly where Jake had predicted it would be, was the faint but unmistakable signature of an artificial pocket dimension. The energy. Readings were unlike anything in the galactic database, but they were definitely there. Something existed in that empty region of space, something that had been deliberately hidden from normal detection methods. Dr. Kolthara turned to Jake with an expression of pure amazement. "Dr. Morrison, it appears you have solved a mystery that has puzzled us for 3 millennia. But how did you see what we missed? How did a human succeed where the greatest minds in the galaxy failed?" Jake thought about the question for a moment before answering. "I think it's because humans are still young. We remember what it feels like to be homesick. We understand the desire to return to a place that exists more in memory than reality. You are all looking for logical explanations, technical solutions, rational motives. But sometimes the most important decisions are emotional ones." The discovery sent shockwaves through the galactic community. Within hours, news of the solved mystery spread to every civilized world. Jake found himself thrust into the spotlight as the human who had accomplished what 3,000 years of advanced alien science had not. But the story was not over. As the scanning team continued their analysis of the pocket dimension, they made an even more remarkable discovery. The artificial realm was not completely sealed. It contained a message beacon, apparently designed to activate when someone finally discovered their hiding place. The message, when decoded, was addressed to the young species who thinks with their heart. The ancients had somehow known that their mystery would eventually be solved by a civilization that understood homesickness, longing, and the universal desire to return to one's roots. They had been waiting for someone exactly like Jake to find them. The message contained an invitation. The ancients had not just recreated their homeworld, they had perfected it. They had built a paradise where any being could experience the peace and contentment of being truly home. They offered to share this gift with the galaxy, but only with species that had learned to balance logic with compassion, technology with wisdom. Jake returned to Earth as humanity's first galactic scholar, but he carried with him something more valuable than fame or recognition. He had proven that sometimes the most sophisticated problems required the simplest solutions, and that the greatest discoveries came not from thinking harder, but from thinking differently. Years later, when other humans asked Jake how he had solved the greatest mystery in galactic history, he would always give the same answer. "I just asked myself where I would want to go if I could go anywhere in the universe, and the answer was always the same. I would want to go home."